I think he's a great choice because the president likes him and trusts him, and the chemistry will be very, very good. Scaramucci's very smart. He also is very clever. I think he'll be a fighter, but he won't be hostile. I think he'll be friendly with the press, but he'll also be very direct and very tough in taking on things that he thinks are false allegations or things that he thinks are just plain inaccurate. I also think promoting Sara Huckabee was really a good idea. She has done a great job. She has her personality that I think is going to wear very well with the American people. And the combination of the two of them may turn out to be a very, very effective duo in hammering home the president's strategy. Remember, this president will be in a war with the elite establishment for every single day of his 2 terms. So for 8 years, they're going to be in a fight, and they just need to relax and have people like Scaramucci who are comfortable fighting, and then people like Sara who are very good at making the press feel comfortable while she calmly and pleasantly disagrees with them.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. Sara Huckabee Sanders has done a very good job. She deserves that promotion. And as far as Scaramucci, I think one takeaway that I had was the fact that he believes in the agenda, Newt. He actually understands that lower taxes, smaller government, lower regulations will impact economic growth. So he's going to make that a priority.
Well, and you've had him on your show many, many times.
Yes.
So, I mean, you know what an engaging personality is, how much energy he has. And I think, frankly, if you're going to be one of the folks who is a shield bearer for Donald Trump, you had better have a ton of energy because you're trying to keep up with somebody who's a whirlwind and who's fairly unpredictable. So I'm looking forward to seeing Scaramucci in this job, and I think I think he'll probably do a really good job, particularly because the next big phase is going to be tax cuts, economic growth, things he knows so well. That he'll be able to, I think, dominate the news media on those kind of topics pretty decisively.
Right, in terms of setting the tone on what's important. And to that end, you have come up with a white paper here, Republican Mid-Course Correction. Let's talk about that, because you're saying the White House, the House, the Senate Republicans need to jointly assess their team's first 6 months.
Sure.
So where are we? Tell us about it.
I mean, think of it being like a football game. It's halftime. As I've said to several Republican leaders, do you really want to repeat the last 6 months? Everyone has said to me, no. Well, if you don't want to repeat it, you got to change. And I think the first big change is to really emphasize by Thanksgiving having a tax cut bill signed into law, which means it has to be fairly simple, fairly straightforward. I think they ought to drop tax reform as a goal, go to tax cut as a goal, recognize that if we don't have economic growth in the first and second quarter of next year that proves we're the party of jobs and prosperity and take-home pay, we could lose the House and be faced with Speaker Pelosi for the last 2 years of this term. I think that would be a disaster of such proportions that every Republican, White House, Senate, House, ought to focus in on, make August jobs and take-home pay and economic growth month, get the bill through the House in September, get it through the Senate in October, get the bill signed by Thanksgiving. It gives Republicans something to talk about, hold town hall meetings on jobs, economic growth, and take-home pay. If the left wants to come, let them. The last president had the weakest 8 years in modern history. Weaker, I mean, what's worse than the Great Depression in terms of economic growth? It is astonishing. Obama's best year was slower than Bill Clinton's worst year. Now, that's astonishing. And we just need to draw the contrast and say, look, those of you who want to go off and talk about Russia, feel free. We want to talk about jobs, take-home pay, economic growth, because they're the key to America's future.
Yeah, and that's why the communications and the messaging is so important, and that's where Anthony Scaramucci comes in. He's going to make sure that that is front and center in terms of the agenda and not the noise that are all of these hearings in terms of Russia. By the way, why aren't there more hearings on tax reform, Newt? How come? I mean, there was a hearing on a subcommittee out of the House Ways and Means Committee last week did a hearing on simplicity. But how come we're seeing so many testimonies on Russia and no testimonies on repeal and replace? No explanation on tax reform, on tax cuts.
Well, look, I think it's a mistake, and I mean, I do think the Ways and Means Committee has done a lot of hearings. But one of the great problems Republicans have is a passion for being boring. I mean, and again, Scaramucci clearly is not a guy who believes in being boring, so I think he will liven it up. But we should be talking about economic growth. We should be talking about jobs. We should get the tax rate down to 15% for business, including a pass-through for small businesses. We ought to have a very substantial middle-class tax cut, probably by doubling the deduction. We ought to get the money back from overseas with repatriation. There are 3 or 4 simple things we could do. And if you went home and you said to people, you want to say you met with your local small businesses and said, if you were at 15% business tax, what would you do? How much better off would you be?
Right.
You know, you'd suddenly have people get excited about something in Washington, and you'd have positive pressure on Congress, including the Democrats. I mean, let the Democrats go home and explain why they want you to pay higher taxes, have fewer jobs, have less take-home pay. I think that a lot of Democrats will break under that kind of pressure.